Hey everyone, this is Ron Johnson. This is Ron Johnson Show on Locked On Sports Minnesota. Got a loaded show today. Just Pete Bercich. Pete Bercich, Vikings analyst. He joined me in the Hanging Ron Johnson segment. Has a ton of nuggets. Also, Dalvin Cook is being recruited by a team that I said he should go to anyway. Who is that? We'll find out next on the Ron Johnson Show.
Locked On Sports Minnesota podcast. It's endless Minnesota Vikings talk with the diverse voices of your local experts. Now the Ron Johnson Show. On the field, in the broadcast booth, Ron Johnson is Minnesota sports. He's played with them, hung out with them, and grown up with all the big names in Minnesota sports. They're hanging out with Ron Johnson. It's the Ron Johnson Show on the Locked On Sports Minnesota podcast. And it starts now.
Hey everyone, it's Ron Johnson. This is the Ron Johnson Show on Locked On Sports Minnesota. As I said, I'm out here in sunny, windy today, Colorado Springs, Colorado, for a little softball tournament. But we got to jump into this episode because Pete Bercich drops a ton. I'm talking about a ton of nuggets with us in the Hanging Ron Johnson segment. But before we do that, remember, this episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of Locked On. Just visit FanDuel.com/Locked On to make every moment more. And I'm regretting not putting I'm in Colorado, so I can legally bet with FanDuel.com. And I should have bet on LSU, but LSU got mollywopped by Florida, and so I just didn't trust that LSU would come back. But they came back and mollywopped Florida. I think it was 18-4 LSU won, so I should have took the plus. I think it was like plus 246. Plus 246 LSU over Florida. I should have did it. But for those who haven't done it, there's still a lot of MLB bets out there, people. So visit FanDuel.com/Locked On to get started today. And as I bring my producer to the show, Sam Ekstrom. Sam, we're going to make this quick, man. Like, Dalvin Cook, and I said it, the Ron Johnson Show, we don't get credit enough. I know we're not. But I said the team that I thought Dalvin Cook should play for was the New York Football Jets. Why? Mm-hmm. Salary cap, they have money. 2, they have a running back coming off injury in Breece Hall. 3, they're contenders, and that's what Dalvin Cook is looking for. 4, he has a connection with some players there, and one of those players tried to recruit him, Sam, and we're going to talk about that. Tyler Conklin went on Good Morning Football, and he put out his recruitment. Now, this is where I really think this is getting steam. So I started it just because we were looking at the salary cap. You pointed out the Jets have money. I said, you know what? The Jets have money. They're a contender. They have Aaron Rodgers. I said as a joke, Aaron Rodgers and Dalvin Cook in the same backfield. Packers, Vikings, all with the Jets. But now it's starting to feel like it's Dalvin Cook, because we know Twitter is real. Twitter's a real place for athletes. Dalvin Cook quote tweeted Tyler Conklin's pitch to get him. He said 100, which means 200%. I feel you, bro. So Dalvin Cook does understand what Tyler Conklin is saying. There's room for you in New York. There's money for you, but will they offer Dalvin Cook enough for him to feel secure in going to the Jets? I would say, look, go be a contender, man. But I do understand, because I saw Melvin Gordon, I think now he has an article out saying the running back is a dying breed. We're not loved or taken care of. I didn't read the whole article, but basically that's what he was getting at. But Dalvin Cook to the Jets, I don't know. What do you think, Sam?
Well, if you're the Jets, I mean, you don't know any time Aaron Rodgers could decide to hang it up, right? After this year, he could decide to hang it up. After next year. So you got to take advantage of this Super Bowl window you have with Aaron Rodgers, and you got to pour all of your resources into it this year. I was shocked to find out that the Jets had $23 million in cap space. That's plenty to sign Dalvin Cook to what he wants and still have some left over. And now you've got a number one workhorse back in your backfield. Maybe it's just a 1-year deal, and then Breece Hall can still be a part of your future, but maybe not put as much stress on that injury. I think it works out great for the Jets, and it's in the AFC, so the Vikings don't have to deal with him. I think that's great.
Well, you know what, Sam? With no further ado, it's time to get to Pete Bercich. Let's get to Pete Bercich because he has a lot to say about the Minnesota Vikings, but also what's next for the Minnesota Vikings. And coming up next on the Hanging Around Johnson segment, we got none other than Pete Bercich, Vikings analyst, voice of the Vikings. Before we do that, we have a word from our sponsors.
Yep. Let me just remind folks that FanDuel brings us today's show. FanDuel.com/lockedon. They're an official partner of Major League Baseball, and you can bet all the Major League Baseball lines, including the Twins at Atlanta tonight. The Braves are favored they're favored -140 on the money line after winning last night at -190. Braves are red hot, 51-27. Can the Twins pull the upset? Bet that and other Major League Baseball games at the easy-to-use FanDuel Sportsbook app. When you win, you get paid instantly, and they've got great promotions going on like the No Sweat First Bet, up to $1,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win, up to $1,000 back in bonus bets at the FanDuel Sportsbook app, or go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to make every moment more and bet with FanDuel, an official partner of Major League Baseball. Major League Baseball trademarks used with permission.
Well, now it's time for the Hanging Around Johnson segment. And as promised, Pete Bercich. Pete Bercich is the voice of the Vikings, played for the Minnesota Vikings way back when they wore leather helmets. He's my co-host on Vikings Game Day Live. Love my weeks with Pete because we are together a lot during football season. So get to catch up with him in the offseason for the first time. With the Ron Johnson show has been going on for a year now. So thank you to all of our partners, NBC. Thank you to Tegna. Thank you to Locked On. Thank you to SiriusXM. iHeartMedia. Thank you to everybody. Amazon Fire. We appreciate you guys as well. And then, of course, those watching on YouTube. But Pete Bercich. So for those that hear him on the radio, hear him make the Buffalo Bills calls, hear him say, "No, what are you doing?" This is what Pete Bercich looks like, people. But Pete Bercich, thank you for joining me on the Hanging Around Johnson segment. I'm going to jump out there, man. You've been with the Minnesota Vikings forever.
Yeah, this will be my 28th season total.
So forever. Player, coach, media member, now voice of the Vikings. Yeah. When you look at the Minnesota Vikings, kind of, I guess we'll call it the stock market. It's some ups and there's some downs. And now it seems like it's like just a holding pattern because you don't know. Like, I think people are high on the coaches, they're high on flow. But people are concerned about some of the players, the Justin Jefferson's contract, Kirk Cousins saying I'm waiting till March to sign my deal. The young guys are going to have to use like a Caleb Evans and some of these guys that are going to have to start. Lewis Cine maybe trying to find his place in there. Danielle Hunter maybe being traded out. Dalvin Cook now gone. Adam Thielen gone. In this holding pattern, where do you see this 2023 season? Do you see it going like maybe 9 wins, 10 wins, or do you see it maybe going down to 7 wins?
It's hard, that part of it's hard to say just because so much in this day and age in this league is about timing, meaning are you all healthy? And I think we've been able to do that. The guys have stayed healthy. I was amazed last year at how well the team played against Green Bay on opening day, despite not having a snap, a lot of them not having a single snap in the preseason. Right. But the ability to stay healthy. And then when you play somebody, we do know this, that supposedly because we won the division, we're going to play more division winners. So our schedule probably won't be easier than it was a year ago. But yet you win so many games by 1 score. Now you go back 2 seasons, you lost a whole bunch by 1 score. Last year we turned that around and won. Was it end up being 9 or 10, Ron? I think overall it was,
like 10 games or almost maybe 11 games.
Could have been.
Within 1 score. Yeah, it was ridiculous.
And so that means you're on a razor's edge a little bit, right? If you want to just project from last year to this year, and then you say, all right, who have we gained and who have we lost? And, I think I look at this year with a lot of key question marks, which we haven't had in a very, very long time. And those questions need to get answered. A lot of this is youth. A lot of it, this is what the 3rd defense in 3 seasons that these guys have had to learn. Fortunately, the offense is staying the same. So my expectation would be it might be a rough beginning of the season, but if some of these young guys come through, and there's a lot of them, man. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's a lot of them. It's like you lose a name that you recognize in a proven commodity. Some of them were on the dissension, and I think that I agree that they should have been gone. But you lose a guy like, let's say, Tomlinson, and so who's going to replace him, right? And you go through that list. And you're like, okay, it's going to be, I think, a little bit more wait and see. If they repeat if they go 13-3, or if they get into the low double digits, I think that'll be a very, very good season.
Yeah, the Vikings 13 wins, an NFL record. 11 of them came in one-score games. 8 of them required Kirk Cousins to engineer a fourth-quarter comeback, tying the NFL record for a single quarterback in a season. So Kirk Cousins set the NFL record with 8 fourth-quarter engineered drives to win the game. So for those saying, like Pac-Man Jones, so this is locker room talk, because I was on Pat McAfee's show. I don't know if you saw the tweet that came out about Pac-Man Jones, but between you and I, Pete, locker room, and between all the listeners, so it's not just me and you, but we got a decent amount of listeners. I think depending on a couple videos have hit 13,000 viewers at one point. So this might be one of those because of Pac-Man Jones. But he said Pac-Man Jones said Kirk Cousins has no nuts. Let's be real. I'm gonna keep it real with you. I changed it for the world. It was cojones for everybody else. Like for you, he said Kirk Cousins has no nuts on the Pat McAfee show. And so my response to him, because that was the question to me. He said, if Kirk Cousins blah blah, how can he do this? And my response to him is that, like, if you don't have those, in your opinion, which we know what that means, it's tongue in cheek, it's a locker room talk. It's you don't have the balls to make the play. You're scared. You're this. You don't lead 8 fourth-quarter comebacks if you don't have some type of clutch gene in you.
Right.
It might not be the way you want it to be, but you have to have something in you. And so to the people that continue to feel this way about the Vikings, even though they changed their pieces, they still have the guy at the gun and they still have Justin Jefferson. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, let me answer it. Let me answer that question with another question, in that you take a look at the folks that are, because you have, let's just say he's a divisive quarterback, right? You've got a lot of people that love him and a lot of people that don't.
Correct.
The people that love him seem to look at the numbers.
Correct.
Right. They're statistics. They look at the numbers. They say, he's at this many fourth quarter comebacks. This is many yardage. This is the average rank of his defense. Right. The people that really like Kirk, they really, I think, dwell on the numbers. And the guys that don't, I think, look at him as a personality. Right. So you look at so many. You look at so many guys, let's say Brett Favre's of the world. I played with Warren Moon, right? And Warren Moon was, you love the guy. He was just cool. He was just a cool cat. Never, was riddled or upset or worried. He was just, he was cool, right?
Yeah.
You wanted to hang out with him, right? You wanted to be around him. They have a magnetic personality. They lead by that. Those are the folks, I think, that don't like Kirk, especially the players, because I think former players don't care about numbers, right? Some do, wide receivers, you guys do, of course, but as a player, you're not, the numbers aren't everything.
Right.
And so they want to look at guys and say, it's like, that's the reason why I was terrible in fantasy football when I played, because I wouldn't have a guy on my team I didn't like. I don't care how good he was. If I didn't like him, I didn't want him on my team. And so that cost me a lot of wins. Anyway, so I think former players look at it that way and they say, you know what, I want to be in the huddle with that guy. And, it's so the haters, I think, have a lot of personality type issues with it. Right. And I think so I'm not really answering your question, but I think I understand where that comes from. Right. I think Pac-Man Jones, when he says, he doesn't have any cojones, or to use your phrase, it's more to do with, you look at the data. Are you going to look at just, kind of
what you see,
how he is, what I mean? He's been very, very healthy, but he doesn't get beat up a lot, right?
Correct.
He gets rid of the football. He does those things. He takes care of himself in that respect. So, you don't see him just, hanging in there and just he does get hit, but he's not taking a beating, right? When's the last game you've seen him just peeling himself off the ground after taking a beating? He's just not that kind of guy, not that kind of quarterback. And there are goods and bads to it. It's just different style. So, it is what it is. The guy can make throws that very few people in the league can, right? Some of the deep throws, the outs across the field. I laugh about this with like Jimmy Garoppolo and people, he's a winner. He's a winner. It's like, yeah, maybe he's a winner, but he only throws the ball between the hash marks, right? He doesn't throw any outs or anything. Like it's a Cousins can do a lot, and he can do, that arm strength is key. But then on the opposite side, he said, I'm going to wait till March to sign my deal. Well, we got to keep a close eye on that arm strength, because once that arm strength starts to deteriorate on Cousins, that's his game.
Right.
It's not about scrambling. It's not about, option or extending plays with your legs. It's none of that. He sits in the pocket. It's not about escapability, mobility, none of that. It's all about accuracy and arm strength. And once that starts to go, then I think we have some. Then you're going to have some issues, and then that's going to really hurt him when it comes to extension time.
Yeah, because you look at Joe Burrow, you look at Patrick Mahomes, you look at a lot of quarterbacks that move in the pocket well. Even Danny Dimes, I guess we'll say Daniel Jones, he moves pretty well in the pocket as well. Yeah. Josh Allen, some guys just have it. And I think that's where Pac-Man Jones, and I know because he kind of said it, but that's where Pac-Man Jones was kind of going with it. He was like, Kirk Cousins is boring. Kirk Cousins doesn't. And this is the other thing, though. And this is a little telltale of what he did. Because as we were talking about Kirk Cousins, I brought up Kirk Cousins never was loved. He never, a lot of Jay Gruden liked him, but the owners never truly liked him, and the GM, and so it's like, well, where does that fall? And then when you get to Minnesota, the GM likes you, but the coach doesn't really want you or didn't care to have you, either way. Yeah. And Pac-Man Jones was like, man, Zimmer's a great guy. Like Zimmer, I love it. And I'm like, yeah, Zimmer was a great guy. He was a great defensive coordinator, great coach, but we can't admit he did not really care for Kirk Cousins. So when Pac-Man quickly defended Zimmer, which even told me more, like you could tell Zimmer didn't like Kirk, which is maybe why because he's a Zimmer guy. So Zimmer's guys, if Zimmer doesn't like Kirk, Zimmer's guys aren't going to like Kirk. And so I think that's part of it, because Pac-Man kind of, we're playing poker. He showed his hand too quick, because the minute I went to that, he was like, no, man, don't talk about Zimmer. Zimmer's a great guy. And I'm like, he is. I'm like, but he mentally kind of maybe knocked Kirk Cousins down a peg. Like Kirk Cousins was scared to make a mistake.
In this offense that we have, in the offense I think that O'Connell's trying to build, you need a passer like that. I mean, I'm interested to see, kind of where Jared Goff kind of falls in this category, because I think Jared Goff's the same. You watch that Lions film. I mean, he did some really, really nice things. He makes some really, really good throws. They use him, I think, perfectly in that style of offense that they have. But you talk about a guy that's not exciting to watch. I mean, you talk about a guy that when you look at him, you're like, is he alive? Is he miserable? he has that same look on his face. But I think that kind of matches this style of offense that we have.
No, you're right. And Jared Goff, when you look at his numbers, he has Kirk Cousins type numbers. Like he does. He's 3,800, 4,600, 4,600 back to back, 4,000, then 3,200 with the Lions because they ran the ball a ton. And then Dan Campbell said, screw this. Let's throw it again. 4,400 yards, 29 touchdowns, 7 interceptions, 100 passer rating, 65% completion in 2022. Yep. So, yeah, you're right. Jared Goff does have the abilities of Kirk Cousins. Kirk Cousins has the abilities of Jared Goff. Just which one this season is going to be unlocked a little bit more. I thought the Lions were going to take the next step, but that's 6 games, and maybe he'll appeal and get them taken away. But those 6 games without Jameson Williams are going to be tough for Jared Goff, because he's not going to have that top off guy that he can count on. But it'll be interesting to see what happens with that. Now, when we look at, looking at the Minnesota Vikings, you look at Kevin O'Connell. I had this week I had the coach on, and he's Chris Rump, defensive line coach, and he talked about the defensive line, and he talked about Dean Lowry coming from the Packers. The one thing he said about Dean Lowry is it wasn't so much of skill, but more so of a veteran presence, like having a veteran presence. He said, we're a young room. He said, we have guys that still are learning who they are in this league. He said, but Dean Lowry's been in this league and is really a good veteran presence in his league, in this locker room. It's going to help us grow. So when you think about that, sometimes experience can help out a young, hungry core of guys. Do you think the Minnesota Vikings, with the way this defensive line is currently, and let's leave Danielle Hunter there. He's not traded yet, so Danielle Hunter, maybe they work out a deal. We all know Danielle's a nice guy. Like, that's the thing people forget. Danielle is a nice guy in the end, so he's going to do whatever helps whatever team he's going to go to. So he's not going to want to screw the Vikings to go to another team that might not work. So he's going to do whatever it takes to help his team. So you put Danielle Hunter on this team. When you look at that defensive line, what is this outlook looking like? Because you said Dalvin Tomlinson gone. With Brian Flores, we know what's his name. Josh Metellus went on K-Fan and said, chaotic but calm. It's a whole bunch of stuff going on, but we all know what's
Right.
going on. Like it's a whole bunch of stuff going on. Like, and it
Right.
when he said that, reminded me of the Baltimore Ravens with Rex Ryan. You know, Ed Reed coming up in the box, then running back. You got, you know, Chris McAllister faking like he's going to cat blitz, and he goes back. And then all of a sudden, ball snap. Ed Reed comes down, covers the tight end. Chris McAllister's back in cover 3. Other cornerbacks back in cover 3. The strong safety is now you're deep, and Ed Reed is free is now you're up. You know, so it's not like you can pick one safety to kind of gauge on. You don't know which one of our safeties is going to create the coverage. And it sounds like the way Josh Metellus is bringing it, you know, a third safety in the game is a big nickel. Now he can blitz. Now he can cover running backs and tight ends. I mean, there's a lot going on. But how can this defensive line help make that chaoticness still be within the part of that game where it's like you got to keep the quarterback in the pocket. You can't let him get outside and scramble. X, Y,
I don't
Z.
know. I don't know if there's no let's say just magic scheme that does everything. It's really the great defenses and the great coordinators. They come up with a system that best suits the players that they have. And we've seen it a million times, right? You've got a guy who's a great coordinator. He goes to another team as a head coach, tries to install the same system, doesn't have the same players. And it's tough, right? It's, you know, as a coordinator, as a defensive coach, you want to run a blitz because it's open. But if the guy you're sending is not going to get the job done, then you've got a problem. That's where guys like, let's say, Anthony Barr was so valuable because you knew if you could blitz Anthony Barr and get the running back to pick him up in protection, which just all that means is that you just figure out which way the center turns, depending on where the running back is. Usually they turn away from each other or whatever. You just send him to that side and let him go. And if you get that one-on-one block, he is going to win it 95% of the time. That's the kind of play, you know, those are the kinds of players that you need. So it doesn't have to be unbelievably complicated. It just needs to be sound, and you got to have the right people to execute it. So there's a feeling out period, I think. Now with the D-line group, you know, that's the group. I think you lose za'darius Smith, and za'darius Smith, if anything, brought a lot of attitude. He played when he was nicked up. You know, I'm sure you talked to him. He's just a big presence. You know what I mean? Now, whether or not he got along with everybody, I don't know any of that, and it doesn't matter to me. But that was a tough dude, man. Right? I mean, the guy had some attitude. And that defense needed that. Right? You needed that. And so I think the loss of his presence and what he can do, is, you know, he was the perfect 3-4 outside linebacker. Base downs, he would beat up any tight end that tried to block him. You could put 2 tight ends on him, he'd still beat him up. But then on third down, he was an interior pass rusher. He wasn't the best defensive end, right? So, you know, that's why you brought in DJ Wanham, and you had za'darius. You let za'darius just pick on whatever guard you wanted him one-on-one. Same thing. You get the center to turn the other way, then you got za'darius one-on-one with the guard in space, and you get a win, you know, 60% of the time, 70% of the time. So losing him, that's big. I think the loss of za'darius is big, and also a Tomlinson. Dean Lowry is a very, very strong guy, and I'm assuming he's played in this type of scheme. And don't forget, now we don't know exactly what defensive scheme we're going to get. Because Flores was never a defensive coordinator. In New England, he was a signal caller, but we all know they have a system there, and he called within that. Now, his next step was being a head coach. Now, and I can't remember his defensive coordinator who was in Miami with him, but he also came from New England. So you assume that the defense he ran as a head coach is kind of what we're going to see here, which is a little more bare front. It's not quite the true 3-4 that we saw last year out of Denver. More man-to-man, that kind of thing. You assume that, but we don't know. Neither do opposing offenses. So you kind of have that, going for you as well. So judging by, Byron Murphy signing at cornerback, we're going to play a little bit more man-to-man because that's what Murphy does. He does that very, very well. But that defensive front, and the other thing in this day and age, you got to have, if you're going to play a 3-4, you got to have 6 guys up front. 6, because you got to rotate them, and do we have the guy that's going to consistently, beat an offensive lineman one-on-one? I don't know if we have that guy yet. So it's going to be tough to play, I think, a true 3-4 with this front.
Yeah, and the guy you're talking about was Graham. He was he followed him from Patrick Graham was with the Patriots through the Super Bowl runs, and he got a shot at the Giants. Like you said, everybody kept trying to get him in, like, hey, come help our defense out. So he went to the Giants, and he went to the Packers in 2018 to help with their run game. And then he went to the Dolphins as defensive coordinator with Brian Flores because, of course, like you said, they had that connection with the Patriots. And he's like, hey, can you come help me put this defense in that Bill Belichick ran? And I think Coach said it the best, Chris Rump. He said, everybody wants to put people in places, but sometimes you can't put people in places they don't actually work. So, he said, basically said, he's looking forward to Flo's defense. He said him, DJ, all the coaches, he said their job is to take what Brian Flores is expecting and then get their guys to do it. And they all do it separately. They all are on the field together. He said, I love this, what he said too. He said, we're in shorts and helmets right now. He said, we really don't have any idea what we're going to look like. So he said, it sounds great. And he's basically talking about Josh Metellus. Josh Metellus is loving it right now. But, from a defensive back standpoint, you can love it because you're just running around like a crazy person, trying to confuse Kirk. Because I did hear, like, in a 2-minute drill, Sam told me it's a 2-minute drill to drive at mini camp to win the game. Kirk Cousins, I think, threw a pick in the very first play. Second play, to the linebacker because he was confused.
And here's this is a funny thing too is you talk about coaches and infighting, right? And this happens all the time during training camp because you want someone, either offense wins or defense wins, and
correct.
Every once in a while, the defense, you'll just sneak in a blitz, right? You'll just install one that you're not really supposed to have in yet,
right?
You know what I mean? And then the offensive coaches get all PO'd because, or you're in a period where you're not supposed to blitz and you do.
Right.
Yep. Defensively, you're like, well, it's not really a blitz. It's kind of a block blitz, So, and so whatever happens in training camp, as far as, again, there's no magic formula. There's no blitz that offenses haven't seen.
Correct.
Everything. It's like in the Bible, right? There's nothing new under the sun.
I'll say Kirk was surprised. The linebacker, I'm guessing he thought the linebacker had rushed. So he threw it to the check down and the linebacker was standing there. Yeah. So
he might have got, he was either surprised or got lazy. Just assumed,
assumed the linebacker came with everybody else that came and nope, linebacker dropped back. But that's the cool thing about Brian Flores' defense is like, from what Josh Metellus is saying, you don't know who's going to be that guy. You don't know who's going to come. We're all going to come up there every once in a while. We're all going to move around. So, and I love talking about that type of defense. I love the Patriots. I love the Ravens. I loved how they did that. Rex Ryan with the Jets with Bart Scott. They tried to do it a little bit when they were actually good and they beat the Patriots to go to the playoffs. I love that defense. I hate it as an offensive guy because if I have to pick up if I'm the hot route, I don't even know who I'm hot off of anymore because I'm like, who's the mic? Like who am I counting off of? Because all 8 of these guys are at the line of scrimmage. So change the play, man. Like I don't even know who the hot route is.
And that's a good point because you're not looking to, you don't see a lot of, in the NFL, you very rarely see a free blitzer.
Correct.
Very rarely do you see a guy. All you're trying to do is to get those guys up front to pause or hesitate for just a fraction of a second.
Yep. That's
just to make them a little unsure. That's all you want. Then you can get an edge, and that's going to give you an advantage getting to the quarterback. So all that moving around and all those different things that you do is just it. Some of it's window dressing, but the whole goal is just like you said. Is that the mic or is this
right?
Yeah. What's hot on? And then the ball snapped, and you're like, oh no. And thank God I went the other way.
That's what people never understood. And I grew up in this. The Pittsburgh Steelers, you remember this. The Pittsburgh Steelers with Greg Lloyd, they all wore 97. Kevin Green, Greg Lloyd, all front 7 wore 97 numbers because they thought, you know what? We can confuse the quarterback because if he makes 97 the mic, then he changed it to 99. If we're all coming, the line is going to get confused because they're like, wait, which number is this 97? Who is this?
Right.
Versus a 54. It's kind of a little bit easier. So I do remember those Pittsburgh Steelers days when they did that.
And those guys were all built the same, right?
They were. They all stood up. They all were tall.
Like fire plugs. You know what I mean? So you can't
all look the same.
You can't just look and say, well, the guy that's 6'2", 195, he's the safety. So I know that they're, whatever.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Oh no, they all that front seven and plus the subs that 90, I think it was 90 to 99. All those guys were besides the two nose guards were all pretty similar. Like they all stood up tall. Like Greg Lloyd Kevin Green was a ridiculous looking man. Like he looked scary. Like I couldn't imagine having to block him. I remember meeting him for the first time. My dad took me to like a Steelers thing. I was like, I don't like, and I was in high school. I'm like, how? Like this is a grown, like how do as a kid, I'm like, and then of course I get to the NFL and I'm like, okay, this is kind of normal. Like there's some giants out here, Julius Peppers, and you know, but at that time as a kid, I had never seen a man that big and cut up. Yeah. You know, and just from lifting weights,
and move, and
could run, move, like it was just like, man, this is scary.
And the long hair, and the long hair before it was normal.
Before it was a thing, it like because now all of a sudden all the Clay brothers and all that Matthews and they all do it now. But last quick,
before we get this quick question though, Ron, was it? You have to, then you look and you say all those names. It's like, okay, so was it the scheme, or was it the players? Could you and I have gone in there and put together a pretty decent defense with that crew?
With the Steelers? You know what I mean? Oh, yeah. With your defensive knowledge, that front seven, yes, because I can control the back end. And basically, you just got to tell me where you're blitzing or who's going.
Right.
And then I'm going to basically run like a two-man. That's all the Steelers did. The Steelers ran two. I mean, think about the Dallas Cowboys. I'll never get the Dallas Cowboys Steelers game with Neil O'Donnell. Because, again, growing up a Steelers guy, Neil O'Donnell, remember he made those 2 errors where he threw it to nobody over there. I think he had money on the game. But the Cowboys just did what the Steelers did. They're like, look, we're going to blitz you and then just play a 2-shell. And then there's nobody threatening me as a corner. I'm going to sit out here and act like I'm covering nobody. But, yes, I have the flat hook. And if you don't send a flat, I can sneak.
One other thing, too. Dixon Edwards, who was with the Cowboys, won a couple Super Bowls and then came with us. His thing when he got here was he's just like how simple that their scheme was. All right. They play a lot of cover 8 and it was just very, very simple. Right. They made some tweaks here and there. But when I was with George O'Leary, I remember him always saying the better your players, the thinner your playbook. Right. If you have the right players and some very good players, you don't need a lot of window dressing. You don't need a lot of fancy things. I think that's kind of the most underrated or overlooked part of coaching is that you could have an 8-8 team, 9-8 team, let's call it nowadays, or a 500 type football team and an average defense, but that coordinator on offense or defense, whatever, could have done the absolute most and got the absolute most out of every single one of those guys on the field.
True.
And so, that's why coach of the years and all that stuff. Sometimes that should go to some guys that only won 8 or 9 games because they're making chicken salad out of chicken. You know what, right? They're getting the absolute best out of the guys that they have. And so, like I said, we talked a little bit about defensively what you have. And if this defense last year with the names that we had now, we were 31st. We ended up 31st, 30th, somewhere right at the bottom.
Yep.
If we get in the top 15, right around 15 or top half of this league defensively, that's one hell of a job by the defensive coaching staff. So, good news is you can't go down much further. You can really only go up, right? But bad news is that's a long way. But we'll see.
I mean, the crazy stat that I saw, 2002 would have been my senior year, 2001. Ed Reed's Miami defense with the Miami Hurricanes, if their offense never scored that season, they would have still went 8-4. If their offense never scored that season, they would have went 8-4 because their defense not only scored but shut other teams down with some of the most ridiculous. So like Ed Reed stole the ball from his defensive lineman and scored. Sean Taylor took one from a guy. Mike Rump took one off of a tip. Right. I mean, it was just like
now think about this, Ron. If you're the offensive coordinator for Miami that year, why not just run the veer option and just keep getting first downs?
Right.
All you got to
run the clock out.
When you have a defense like that, just don't turn it over.
Yeah, true.
Just hand it, just run the veer option, some safe stuff. And if you got a punt, who cares? Just punt. Right.
True. No, that's what's crazy. Like when I saw that, I'm like, 8-4 because they had so many goose egg games where they were stopping teams. They were only getting field goals, and then they were scoring touchdowns on defense. It's like two field goals and a touchdown.
You and I might have that in common in this respect. I played for the Vikings when we were, when they were very, very good, but we were known for our offense, right? You played Pittsburgh, that's known for the defense.
Ravens.
Or Ravens, and
known for the defense. We were all defense. Yeah, we threw the ball 10 times against the Cleveland Browns. Yeah.
Now, had you been on the Vikings offense and I was on the Ravens defense, man, maybe that would have been better. Maybe.
Oh, for sure.
Whatever.
Oh, for sure. I mean, I look at like Nate Burleson. Guys like that came to the Vikings, or Sidney Rice and some. Like when you're in an offense that's going to throw the ball 35 times a game, you're going to get opportunities.
That's a good point.
I was talking to Todd Heap about this because me and Todd caught up and we talked about the Jamal Lewis game and a lot of Ravens talk about it because of the Vikings. Adrian Peterson ran for 296. Jamal Lewis ran for 295. So a lot of Ravens guys talk about that one like that's BS. He should have ran. Give him 300 yards. Just go for 300, coach. Don't stop at 296. But that game, we were all a part of it, and it was like history. But we thought back, we're like, man, Kyle Bowler, Billick didn't trust Kyle Bowler. Mm-hmm. Only threw the ball 10 times, and none of the passes were longer than 15 yards. He threw me a hitch. He threw Todd Heap two like tight end pop passes because it was hot, like whatever, too many guys in the box. So he checked it and just threw a pop pass. He threw a slant, and then he threw like two fades that were incomplete. That was it. Like, other than that, Billick was like, man, look, we're going to run the ball because my defense is killing it today. And so, and I get it because Brian had won the same way with the Super Bowl run, that year.
Yeah.
What's his name? Trent Dilfer didn't do much. It was don't turn the ball over.
Along those lines, too, think about it this way. Gruden goes and wins a Super Bowl with Tampa, right?
Yep.
He was an offensive coach, but when he was there, his defense was unbelievable. Billick, great offensive coordinator. And I think it's a lot of those guys have that. I think they have that in common where they got the absolute most that they could out of that side of the football and just let the other side of the football win for them. So, you know what I mean? It's like, it's not like Billick went down to Baltimore and just became the greatest offense. He ran the highest scoring offense in the history of the NFL with the 98 Vikings.
Correct.
And he goes to a defensive dominated team and gets the absolute most that he possibly can out of that offense.
Yep.
And, so sometimes it works that way. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I'll never forget Brian. Ray Lewis told Brian one day, like, Brian, just don't screw it up. Like that's right. That's what he would say. And he called him by his first name. Because like when you got that much money,
man, if you're that, think about it, if you're that good.
Hey,
I was never good enough to show up late or call coaches by their first name.
He would yell it out from the bench. Hey, Brian, just don't screw it up. I got this. And he would look up. I would see him grab the phone. He'd tell Rex Ryan something. Rex Ryan would, switch it up. And then all of a sudden you just see the defense, just like Ed Reed would start talking and we seen this on film, blah, blah. And then he would come off the field after a punt and just say, Brian, don't mess it up. Just get us down there. Just keep changing the field. And eventually it worked. Like Jamal would score. And so, but the Minnesota Vikings are the team we're talking about. The Minnesota Vikings, I'm Ron Johnson, Pete Bercich. Looking forward to the 2023 season. Pete Bercich has not made his prediction yet. I know at training camp, first preseason game, we're all going to sit down at that desk, Vikings Game Day Live, and we're all going to give our predictions on who's going to be the NFC North and the AFC North champions.
Yeah.
We'll see what this offseason does because there's a lot of trades still happening. But I'm Ron Johnson at Pete Bercich. I want to thank you for joining me on the Hang with Ron Johnson segment. Up next, we've got the Daily 3. That's 3 questions, probably 30 seconds each because me and Pete ran long, but definitely love talking to Pete. XM Radio has a word for you coming up next.
Well, remember, people, you can catch every pitch of the Twins' hometown broadcast with Sirius XM. Just go to the SXM app. It's a 6:40 p.m. game, people. You got to check out the Twins on the SXM app. Just search Twins. Also, search Locked On Sports Minnesota because you can have our podcast as well on the SXM app because Locked On Sports is a proud partner with Sirius XM. Well, I'm Ron Johnson. That's Sam Extra. Sam, Pete Bercich, man, he dropped a lot of nuggets. Really loved the things he had to say about the Minnesota Vikings and what's next. But we don't have enough time for a Daily 3 today. I would have said 1 second each, but that wouldn't be good. We'll be back tomorrow, though, because Coach Chris Rump, D-line coach, that's Danielle Hunter's coach, people, is going to join us on the Hanging with Ron Johnson segment. That's the D-line. That's the guy to get up to the quarterback. That's Kevin O'Connell's guy he bought in. He's going to talk a little bit about Ed Donatel. The difference is Ed Donatel and Brian Flores. I'm Ron Johnson. That's Sam Ekstrom. We'll see you guys tomorrow. Have a great one.